Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's disc review, we are taking a look at the Cinnamon from Clash Discs. Let's go ahead and kick things off by taking a look at the profile. Now the Cinnamon has a gradual amount of dome that leads all the way up into the center of the disc. So it's not necessarily pop-topped, it's just a nice gradual amount of dome that leads all the way to the center, meaning it's a very consistent feel, great for backhand. Not a very deep feel, but not super slender either, just kind of the nice Goldilocks in the middle. And while it feels great for backhand, that doesn't necessarily translate over to a forehand grip. For the flight numbers, well, the Cinnamon is a fairway driver that has a speed of 9, glide 5, turn negative 1.5, and a fade of 2. So at least on paper means this should be a pretty neutral, slightly flippy in the earlier part of the flight with a bit of fade. However, I am a slower arm speed, and I did not find that to be the case. It was maybe for my arm speed, someone who throws about 325 feet on a max distance driver. This is probably more of like a negative 0.5. It is much more torque resistant than I was expecting. It did have a really nice finish at the end, but even when I do throw this flat, it rides just really straight. Maybe just the slightest amount of a panning turn, but really it just kind of flies out straight before it slows down, checks up, and then has a nice hyzer finish. And speaking of a hyzer, when I threw it on a hyzer, it did not want to get any kind of flip up whatsoever. It just held that arcing hyzer line the entire way. However, I will say that when I did start throwing the Cinnamon on a forehand, I did start to see that panning turn that I was expecting in that middle part of the flight, and then again just that nice fade as it almost does kind of fly in a straight line when thrown with that extra torque on forehand. It gets a little bit of a panning turn and then hyzers back just enough to almost be dead center, which makes the Cinnamon, at least for backhand, a great option when you need something that's going to ride very straight and then have a predictable finish, while then for forehand it's going to be effortless flex shots with that extra torque. Now, when I did start throwing it on anhyzer lines, it wasn't something that was going to fight out of those anhyzer angles very quickly. In fact, it would actually hold that anhyzer line for a good chunk of the way before then maybe just at the very end of the flight it would try to stable up, depending on how much height you gave it. When I threw it low, it would kind of hold it almost towards the ground, and when I threw it high, it would get just a little bit of a check up here. As you can just see, it starts to hyzer out towards the very end, but you do have to give it height because it does like to hold that anhyzer line. Whatever angle you put it on, that's what the Cinnamon likes to hold. When you throw on a hyzer again, it's going to hyzer. When you throw it flat, it's going to ride incredibly straight. And then once you do start putting it on those anhyzer lines, it's going to hold that angle. So this is actually a disc that could be great for those one-shot rounds, or really just be a workhorse in your fairway lineup, just because of just all the different angles that you can release it on and get a lot of different varying shots. And let's go ahead and take a look at some of those shots out on the course. This hole has quite a bit of downhill elevation and a bunch of trees guarding the pin, so you really have to go out wide to either the left or the right. Being the lefty, I'm going to go out to the left, and I like throwing on a hyzer line the Cinnamon, let it hold straight a good amount around that obstacle, and then just let it stall and fight in down towards the basket. For this shot, I don't want to go forehand because of that tree on the right off the tee that I could shank it into, but then I also have that tree on the left-hand side down in the later stages of the flight. Well, with the Cinnamon, just keeping on the slightest of hyzers, it's going to ride straight, but then I know it has enough late stability to hyzer itself out and keep me away from that danger. So with the low ceiling on this hole, I opt for the forehand with the Cinnamon, and this just shows you just have to rip into it. You're going to get a little bit of that nice little panning turn before towards the end of the flight it's going to check up and fight back to the middle of the fairway. I mentioned earlier the Cinnamon likes to hold that angle of release. Well, because of the way the trees are set, I'm opting for the big turnover shot. Just start the Cinnamon on that anhyzer, watch it hold, and depending on the height you gave it, it will hold that anhyzer almost all the way to the ground. For the lefty lines, I decided to compare it against a few other discs out on the market with fairly similar flight numbers. First, you have the Cinnamon, which as you can see flies very straight, and as it slows down, it has that dependable finish at the end. While next up from Casaplast, we have the Falk. I apologize, I'm going to be absolutely butchering that name. So again, apologies to all my Swedish viewers. Now, it does have the same speed, more glide, just a smidge more turn, and then a little bit less fade. But the Falk overall got more turn in the middle of the flight before just a very subtle fade at the very end. And then the in of a Gorgon, which is a little bit faster than these other two, but fairly comparable to the Falk, both in the earlier parts, mid parts of the flight with a bit more turn. And then just as it slows down, it kind of has more of a dumping finish. So a little bit more overstable at the later parts of the flight than the Falk. But at the same time, the Gorgon does mimic the Falk's more understability in the earlier parts of the flight, which is what I would more consider the Cinnamon to do. But maybe for players with bigger arms, this is how the Cinnamon is going to fly. But for us slower arms, as you can tell compared to the others, it is just very, very straight within a dependable finish. So overall, I think the Cinnamon definitely has its place as a trustworthy fairway driver for players with slower arms, as kind of a slightly wind-fighting fairway driver that you can have the confidence that it's not really going to turn over, but then it can also hold the torque from forehands extremely well. So overall, a great option in a fairway driver lineup for players of most skill levels. Bigger arms, this is going to be a big turnover disc. Thank you all so much for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and be sure to check out Great Lakes Disc for your next disc purchase. Till next time everyone, keep banging them chains.